I've used the Peony Blooms stamp set. I've used the 3D embossing folder, the dotty one, and also the Blooming Peony 3D embossing folder also. I'm going to actually introduce a couple of stencils as well. These stencils are also on Lisa's website, and these were released a good while ago. This is from a set from the Slimline stencils, but I just really like the pattern on the inside. I think it just worked really well with this today, so I should be introducing these into the background also. Right, I've done quite a lot of prep work for this because, as Dawn rightly said when she put the advert up for this live on Facebook, it is actually done on watercolour card. So there's a good element of lots of sort of wet media which will take time to dry. So I'm hoping I can get through this without having to bring on board the heating tool and to hold me up or whatever. Okay, so we'll just put this to one side. Now there's a couple of ways of doing this. Right, I think I'll start with the background. I've created the background myself, and as I said, it is from watercolour cardstock. This is so I have a whole pack of watercolour cardstock that I'm using at the moment, and I've used various different things. The main colour palette I've used is Dusty Concord and Peacock Feathers. So I've used a mixture of oxides and normal distress ink also. And because I had them, I thought I'd give them a go. I also have the Distress Oxide spray too. Okay, so initially to start the background, I went in with these sprays just to cover the large area, because I think Dawn's introduced this to you before, to create like a masterboard where you work on a larger piece of card and then you cut out, create your background, gives you a chance to try out different techniques, and then you take out your favourite part of that to actually work with and create your project. So initially I just wanted to cover the area, so all I've done was just from a distance just sprayed lightly the Distress Oxides. So it's Peacock Feathers on the top there, and then I'm using, oh sorry, that's milled lavender. Oh, I'll tell you why I use milled lavender. I don't have Dusty Concord as a spray, but that doesn't actually matter too much. This works really well. So we have the lighter colour in the bottom, and I just overlap the two. Now generally when I use the sprays, I tend not to keep them as they are. I do like to blot off a lot of the excess. And also what I like to do, just to get rid of the sort of the pattern spray there, I'm just going to spray some water on there. So this allows the ink just to move about a little bit. If you're familiar with the sprays, you'll have your own favourite way of using the sprays, but by adding water I find I can take off a lot of the wetness there, and it's just gives me that beautiful colour tint underneath, and I have my background covered there. Now this, as you can imagine, is quite wet at the moment, so you would need the heat tool to dry this. So I'm just going to put this one to one side and just bring in one that I'd done earlier on. I've done it in exactly the same way, but obviously when you use sprays like this, each one will come out really differently, which is great. So the next thing I done, I just wanted to lay some colour on the top of this, on top of the lighter colour here. So this is where I did come in with my Dusty Concord, and I used the, what did I use? I used the Distress Oxide, and I just put this onto my messy mat. This is Lisa's messy mat. You've seen her use it in every single show that she does on Create Craft, and also most of the design team will have these also, and it's perfect for working for this type of technique. So I put some of my Distress Oxide on the mat, and I'm just going to spritz that with water, And you can see actually that it's a really good mat for this, because when you spray the water onto the ink, it beads really well. There are some mats which look and feel the same, but for some reason the ink just doesn't sort of bead up this way. What that means, it allows you a lot of fluidity, give the ink a lot of movement. So what I want to do is just dip this, my piece, into the ink there, and you can see I start colour tinting the background here. Sorry, I'm using toilet roll here. I don't actually have any kitchen rolls, so hopefully nobody's offended by that. It's just a useful tool. So I'm just going to do that again, and what I want to have happen is just a bit more texture going on. So I'm going to put less water on there this time, and just pick up the ink. Ah, and there we are. We can see a bit more texture going on to the card, like so. There we are. That's what I wanted. So there we are. We have the dusty Concord coming into play there. Now again, I would take the heat tool and dry all of this off to create the background. But the next thing, the technique that I wanted to show you is to create some like water droplets onto the background. So I'm just going to take my spray again and a paintbrush, and I just want to flick bits of water onto mainly the blue part at the top, just to create some texture, different texture in here. And I can see from the light that I've got a good even spread of water droplets there, or splodges, as the technical term would be. And what I want to do is just allow them to sit there for just a bit, because that will activate the ink that is sitting under those water droplets, and I'll just give that a little bit longer. And what we do, we just then come in either with a paper towel or one of your microfiber towels, it really doesn't matter at this stage, and instead of rubbing, all I want to do is just dab off those water spots. And what that produces, hopefully you can see, I'm just trying to look on the screen there, perhaps I'll lift that up a little bit. You can actually see we have water marks there, so it gives you like a raindrop sort of splatter effect, a spotty effect. So that just adds more texture onto the background there that you can see. And you can see why now that I would actually choose the watercolour card to create this background, because we're using a lot of wet mediums and we need some cardstock that can actually take all of that. Now again, I would either, if I was working on my own and didn't have any sort of time constraints, I would probably allow that to dry off on its own. You can use a heat tool also. And then what I would possibly do is leave that under something heavy, or possibly sit that just under my mat. I've got like a big acrylic mat that sits on my desk, and I would possibly put it under that, so as it dries it would actually flatten out and give me a really nice smooth surface. So what I've done, again, to save me drying this on camera, I've actually prepared one earlier with exactly the same techniques. You can see I've got all the texture from dabbing the ink pad onto the mat, and also I've created the splats on top, but now we have a completely dry surface to work on, and I have two backgrounds that I can use at a later date. So it's win-win all round. So now we have a completely dry surface, this is where I can start introducing some colour and texture with my stencils. So I think what I'll do, I'll come in initially with this like a mandala style. So I'm pretty sure it's in the set of 4, which coordinate perfectly with the slimline dies. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that sneeze came out of nowhere. Okie doke. Right, so I want to just create some subtle layered texture onto the back of this, really. I mean, this whole design was born out of me just playing on the background initially, and then I just reached for different bits and pieces that were on my desk just to sort of make it into a project that I could present to you. But this is, you know, I really enjoy creating this sort of thing also. So I'm going to use probably the Distress Oxide, purely because I haven't used that yet. So there's no science particularly to this, you just use what you fancy. I'm sticking with 2 colourways so that I know that everything will coordinate. I'm using Lisa's Fantastic brushes, which are so dense and beautiful to use to blend, and ideal for getting into some of the smaller parts of the stencils actually, I find, where a sponge isn't always flexible enough, or you can't manipulate it in such a way, but because we've got the bristles work so well. So I'm just going to gently start adding some ink and colour through this stencil. Now this stencil has got a border, as you can see, which is absolutely perfect, but for this I'm going to try and avoid that and just keep within like the central band, because I don't want to have a sort of the straight line and a border on here. So I'm just going to try and avoid that, and I'm just going to go really lightly to start with. We can always add more colour. And taking that away now, you can see because we've got the coordinated colour and we haven't got any of the borders, this pattern just merges itself into the background straight away. And I have to say, when the first time I saw this, it sort of took my breath away, and I thought, oh, that is lovely. That's exactly the look that I was after. Now this time I'm just coming across, I'm going slightly into the peacock feathers, just really lightly, not too much ink because we don't want it to be the main focal point. There we are, and you can see just how well that really blends into the pattern and the design of the randomness of the ink. So I'm just going to come up to the top here, just really lightly. I'm not necessarily putting any extra ink on my brush unless I have a quick look, and I'm just using a different part of the stencil and just working that in, and we can pull that away, and you can see we've got a tiny bit of colour there. We don't want anything too bold. Well, I don't, and anyway, I mean, this is the type of project that you can just build, and this can be you can build it to be exactly your own style. I really like the way that that's shaping up. So I just want to add a slight bit of variation with this different stencil here. I like the fact this is tiled, so we do have some straight lines in here, so we have a little bit of lining up to do. I'm just going to come in very lightly with an oxide, I think. I don't want this to be in your face, and I'm just going really lightly over the stencil. I've probably picked up such a tiny little bit of ink. Yeah, tiny bit of ink, which is all that I need really. And really gently, I'm not putting any pressure onto the background here until I know that I've worked a lot of that ink, and then I can start working and pushing that brush a little bit harder through the stencil just to work out the last of the ink that I have sitting on there. I'm just going to come in with a bit of Distress Oxide actually. Again, gently. We don't want anything, well, I don't want anything too in your face at this stage. So once I know that I've worked off that initial bit of ink, and I can come in and really add some extra pressure, and then I can move that away, and you can see we have just a really subtle background, which I think works really well with these mandala backgrounds also. So I'm just going to get the large flower stamp, and another way to create some detail in the background is to actually stamp the large flower, which I put on the large block, with some Distress Oxide ink. So I feel like I'm backtracking a little bit now, but I really wanted to show you this. I thought this was a really cool technique, and I just want to overstamp in the background just gently with this larger flower. Again, this is all about building up the patterns in the background. I just want to stamp that in Distress Oxide because I know that this will stay wet for a reasonable length of time. Don't need to worry that it hasn't stamped properly because this isn't going to be the focus. It's just going to blend into the background. And what I actually did is actually added some mica powder onto this also. Because the Distress Oxide stays wet just that little bit longer, it meant that I could buff this mica powder onto the stamped image there, and that will actually pick up all the detail and tone down the boldness of that Distress Oxide in the background. And I think that just gives a really nice detail, especially when it catches the light in the background. We should add a tiny little bit more there. There we are. You can see how that colour has toned down. And that really blends itself into the background. But it's almost like a foiled effect when you start tilting that towards the light. I'm hoping that you can see that. Again, that's one of those things, when you actually have this project in your hand, it's those small details that you'll be able to see. The next thing I was saying, I'm actually going to start working on the flower so I can start thinking about how I'm going to work with the composition of the piece. So, the flower, as I showed you before, comes from the Peony Blooms. It's the largest stamp that I'm using. I already have this mounted on my stamping platform, which I say is unusual for me, but there's a reason for using the stamping platform today. I've already stamped out the flower, so I'm going to replace. I'm going to replace the flower that I've already stamped and put this back in, which is in the same position as I removed it from. And because I haven't removed the stamp, I know that when I come to need to restamp it, the flower is going to be in exactly the same position. So I've stamped the flower with an archival ink. It's a waterproof ink, which is what I needed because I wanted to watercolour the flower, and I've actually used watering cans. It's a really lovely grey. I didn't want the harshness of the black. I'm going to leave the flower in there actually, and you can possibly see, I'm not sure, especially if I tilt it, you can see that I've already started watercolouring this. Now I'll show you how I watercoloured. Hopefully I'm coming back online again at some stage, and hopefully I'm all in shot. I don't know. So I'm going to take some of my Distress Oxide and just put this onto my messy mat at the side. Now I'm going to add a little bit of something different this time round. I'm actually going to be using some of the mica powder. I'm using the Ice White. And I used the mica powders last week in my live, but I used them in a slightly different way. So this time I just wanted to show you how they can actually be used as a watercolour, or mixed with water to use as a paint. So I'm going to take out a tiny amount. I really don't need much at all. So I'm take it. There's probably even too much there actually. I'm going to take a tiny amount out and put that on my messy mat there. I'm going to bring in some water and just add that to my Distress ink, and with the help of a water brush, again these are Lisa's water brushes, and I apologise at that because I forgot to see if these were actually in stock. If you don't have a water brush like this which has a reservoir for the water, a normal paintbrush and a jar of water would be absolutely fine. So I want to watercolour with the Distress Oxides, then I know that this is going to coordinate with all the background. But what I want to do is actually introduce some of that mica powder. So we're going to have a distress colour, but pearlised, with some of that mica powder in. And then what I can do, just dab off some of the excess there, I can then start watercolouring and building up the colour on my stamped flower. Now if you want a bit more intensity of colour, we just sort of dab off the colour, bring some more ink into these reservoirs here that we have pooling on the mat, and we could just continue to colour. There we are, you can see that we have a higher intensity of colour there. Now you don't need to be a fantastic watercolourist. If you are, then that's brilliant, but I was just really, what I want to say, really don't be put off by the fact that you think you can't paint. I can't particularly paint, but I always wanted to, and so I found this was a really, really nice way to actually add colour using the watercolour look. You can colour a lot freer, I think, this way with watercolours than you can with alcohol markers. That's my personal opinion. Obviously we all have our strengths and weaknesses, but really just don't be put off by the fact that this is like a watercolour. And we just allow that to dry, and then we can go back in and add some darker colour. Just pick up the undiluted distress ink here and just come back into the parts where there's shadow on the stamp, and we can just add a higher, you know, a darker intensity of colour there, and that's where we can start seeing that we can start building up some shadow and some shading using your watercolour brush. You can see there how that's working. Now I won't sit and colour the whole of this for you. I just wanted to show you the technique basically. I think watercolour is actually really forgiving, and I just wanted to add that little bit of extra by adding some mica powder, just to add something different. Now to colour the leaves, I've come in with one of the distress markers, and I've used a bundled sage, which is probably one of my favourite greens because I think it just matches the colours so well. All I've done was just straightforward and just coloured those in like so. As I say, I'm not going to colour the whole lot in for you, but the reason why I wanted to leave the flower on here, because I found that initially when I coloured with the mica, it just sort of dulled down some of the stamped lines. Now it may be a look that doesn't bother you entirely, but what you can do, you can leave this on here once the flower is dried and the watercolour has dried. What I actually found you could do with the confidence of the stamping platform, I'm just inking up the flower stamp there on the other side if you can't quite see that, but all I can do now is just re-stamp that flower. You don't need to press particularly hard or whatever. You can just re-stamp that, and any of the lines that might have been dulled down by the mica is just sort of reinvigorated by an extra layer of stamp. You still have the benefit of all the shading that you've done with the watercolouring and the mica, but then you have the stamped image again sitting on top of that. So I think that was just a really nice way to refresh the flower. And if I bring in my original here where I didn't do that, you can just see, just as I tilt that flower a little bit, that some of the lines just are lost a little bit. Again, it's entirely up to you, depends on what type of look you want from the project. But I thought that was just a really a good solution. So I can remove that out. Now this now is ready for die cutting. So I would take the largest die from the set there, and I would run this through the machine, and we have ourselves a die cut flower. So that's ready to go onto the project. Say in real time your flower would probably be a little bit damp and a little bit so we just need to leave that dry to one side, so we have that there ready. The next elements I want to just address on here are the backgrounds here, which I've used the embossing folders for. Because I cut down the A5 card, I had some little odds and ends of watercolour card, which I, instead of just sitting there, I wanted to try and make use of. So I embossed the one piece of them with the Peony embossing folder, the 3D folder. I've done it in one white card, but what I actually thought I'd do is actually use the deboss. That's the emboss there. We've used this on various lives, and all the design team have actually, and we've seen Lisa use it on our shows. But what I did want to just try and do, and this came about more of a mistake of having coloured the card first and then putting it through the embossing folder. I put it through the wrong way round and it came out with the deboss, but I really liked the effect. So I want to use the defect, and I just want to show you how I coloured this up. So how did I do that first? I used the Distress Oxide and a brush, and we just really lightly coloured the background with the brush and the Distress Oxide all over the background like so. Then to create some extra dimension and just different sort of textures on the card, I come in with the Distress ink and now just wipe this over the top of the cardstock like so, and it picks up everything that's in relief. So now we can start seeing, we're getting some dimension to our embossed piece of card or debossed piece of card. And I just played about with it. I added some water just to see what that would look like, and we can start seeing it starts looking like, I think, like velvet type of cards. And I dabbed that away just so as it didn't become too intense, and you come back in and I would just layer up a bit more oxide, which in the same colour family but slightly different sort of colour look, and we can just see here just how that is building up in colour. And I've actually got one that I was playing around with and created earlier and is all fully dried now, and we've got this here, so it has a really textured look to this. I added a little bit of dimension onto this also. Again, it was a session where I really was having a play, and I threw all sorts at everything that I was doing. So what I'm going to do now is just come in with the clear embossing ink, and I'm just going to swipe this over the top of the pattern there. I don't want too much, I'm not going to overdo it. And you can see that's really dry now because it's left my ink pad really clear. And I'm just going to, on top of a piece of copy paper, and bring in my mica powder again. I was just playing, I just wanted to see what it was like to add some mica powder on the deboss side. So just add a tiny little amount, you really don't need very much at all. So I'll just put the lid on there again. So what we do, we just swipe this across, and then we just brush off the excess with the buffing end here. Now you won't be able to see too much at the moment, and I'm working blind here because my computer screen has gone, so I'm hoping in a second that when I pick this up for you and start tilting that to the camera, you can see that we have that distressed mica look in the background, just adding that little bit of shine, which I think is just super design. Again, it's one of those things that really looks better in the flesh when you actually have this in your hand. And I think that's just a really pretty look. We have the texture of the watercolour card coming through in the different textures of the two different types of ink. And I thought that was a really nice background that our flower can sit onto. I think that just looks so pretty. Particularly as we know that we've used the Dusty Concord ink throughout, so we have sort of complete coordination. what I can do now, bring in my background. Now this is where, again, you can go to town, and this is just a complete personal preference as to how you actually start building the composition of your piece here. I opted for the ripped look on the side, so you can just see, just a rip and tear backwards and forwards, so we have some parts where the core of the card, the white card, is exposed, and some parts not. And we can see just how pretty this looks on the card here. I'm going to leave the straight edges this time round. Now I just wanted to introduce a different layer. Again, this time I used the Dotty embossing folder, and I've used the peacock feathers, and I created it in very much the same way as I created this. I haven't added any mica to this one though. I just wanted to keep this one as is. But it's just a case of blending the ink onto the background, embossing it, and then just swiping the ink pad down, which gives us these striations, which I really like. And I think I might just layer this on like so. Now I'm sure most of you have things laying around on your desk, and I've had a couple of these discs from Lisa's nested plain and scalloped circle die sets on my desk for a long time, actually, cut out from grey. I think when I was making aperture cards, I had the discs left over, which left sitting on my desk, and I thought it might be quite a nice idea just to ground this collage section with that in the background, and it would also give a really nice background to the flower, like so. So that's where we can say we start building the collage. I don't put a huge amount on myself personally. I always think sort of less is more, and I find if I go too far into building it up, then it ends up looking a mess, and I'm not happy with it. So I was just quite happy with the textures and the colours that I've managed to introduce, like that. I really like the dark in the background. Now this would work with any flower also. I'm not going to stick this together at the moment. I've lost track a little bit of the time. So yeah, that's basically how I created the collage with all the different techniques. You can use it as a card, or you can use it as a lovely note to send somebody, or just a piece of artwork. So it's entirely up to you the type of sentiment you add. I've added sentiments here from Lisa's, what are they called? From Lisa's wordage sheets. Yes, that's it. I've used in black, so I think that really coordinates perfectly well with the background here. I hope I've shown you a few more techniques today that you possibly wouldn't have thought of using in the past. I apologise, I can't answer any of your questions at the moment. I can't see any of your comments. My computer's gone down, and I'm working a little bit blind actually, so I hope I haven't gone on for too long. Also, it's the troubles of the internet, isn't it? It's even though we've got a settled day, who knows what gremlins are in the system there. As I say, apologies, I can't see anything that anybody's saying at the moment because my phone is there recording for you. I shall get this edited, so I shall cut out all the bits where it's all gone very quiet, and it can be there on YouTube ready for you to catch up with later. So thank you so much for sticking with me this afternoon. Apologies again if it was a little bit disjointed. I look forward to being with you again next Tuesday. Thanks a lot everyone. Bye.